Story Time with Stephanie Story.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Storey, art historical novelist. Welcome to my show, Story Time, where I get to talk to other writers. I am genuinely excited about my guest today because she is not only a writer, but she's also an artist. And we all know how obsessed I am with artists. So this is going to be a very exciting conversation. We're going to talk about art and writing and all kinds of things. She's an award-winning painter and sculptor and glass artist. She has also written books, including, I'm excited to dive, I have not read this one, but I'm excited to dive into this one. It's where she invites readers into her studio to see the creative process. It's called The Creative Path, a view from the studio on the making of art. But the reason why she's here, because a book of hers that I happen to love is The Joy of Art, How to Look at, Appreciate, and Talk About Art, which came out on April 7th, 2020, the same day as my Raphael did. So we have like twin children. Welcome to the show, Carolyn Schlam.
Oh, thank you so much. I didn't know that your book came out the same day. That's incredible.
Mm-hmm. Two art books out brand new in the world.
Amazing.
Right at the beginning of the pandemic. Oh.
Yeah, I know. Mine was delayed many months.
Was it?
Copyright issues and it was delayed. So I was happy it came out at all.
Were the copyright, let's just get into it. Were the copyright issues because of the artworks that you had to go through and deal with? And
well, the book has 150 photographs of art through the ages, examples of all the things that I discuss. And the publisher limited me only to public domain images, which made it impossible. I was willing to buy images. You know, if an artist has been dead less than 75 years in the US, they're under copyright. And you have to get permissions from various foundations. The whole process is really cumbersome and difficult. But I was very fortunate in that since the book was delayed, I was heartbroken because how can you have an art book and not have a Picasso and a Matisse? Impossible. And they wanted copyright. I couldn't get a single image. But in the interim, when the book was delayed, a Picasso and a Matisse came off copyright. So I was able to include them. So I was saved. The book was saved. Oh, but it made it very, very difficult. You know, I had to get lots of permissions. It was very difficult.
Isn't that interesting, though, that because of a delay, something positive ended up happening? I always sort of find that interesting in art or writing or in anything, that timing sometimes ends up working out.
Absolutely. Happenstance plays a large part in art making and our lives too, of course.
Okay, so I love the book, but the reason why I love it is because you are an artist who is helping to give readers at home sort of access to art, a way to relate to art that sometimes seems scary and up on a pedestal and like it's something that's too difficult for all of us to understand. You try to give people access to that. Why did you write this book, and what were you trying to do? What was sort of your thought behind putting this book out in the world?
Okay, well, the book arose, I had written The Creative Path, and I was really revved on writing. I wanted to write another book. And I happened to be in New York. I was at a Picasso sculpture show. And the show was so dense with, it was such a popular show that you couldn't get to see anything. And everyone was standing, there would be a crowd in front of each piece, snapping photographs with their smartphones. And it suddenly occurred to me, there's my book. What are these folks going to do with these smartphone images? They're going to be erased when they get home. Are they really getting anything out of this experience? So the original working title of the book was Come to the Museum with Me, An Artist Looks at Art. And that was my plan. That was my intention. I was going to make a tool book, a toolkit, so to speak. So folks could, take their informed selves to the museum. And their experiences would be meaningful. They wouldn't need to take smartphone pictures, which they eventually erase. So that was the genesis of the book.
So have you gotten to hear back from readers who have, it's so funny. It's so interesting that it came out at the beginning of a pandemic when people aren't able to go to museums at this point and go interact in person with
That was
art.
unfortunate. That was
But on the other hand, people are trying to interact with art online. I mean, there's so many museums that have opened up virtual collections. Have you had a chance yet to hear from readers who have had their impressions of art changed by your work?
Yes, I actually have. Well, first of all, since I'm an artist, I have an artist website, carolynschlam.com. And so people can, they're interested in the book and they go and they find my website. And then they often write to me. I've gotten some really, really wonderful letters from people who found the book, said that they finally understand art, or that's an amazing thing to hear from someone, that it all makes it, that all of the sections of the book make sense, and that they can't wait to go to the museum. Hopefully, the museums will open, and now people can take their new eyes to the museum.
Right? I mean, just a new way to, instead of feeling like, I always feel like whenever I go to art museums with people, they always want me to like teach them because I'm an art history like buff and whatever. And I always just want to go, look at it, just look at it and have your own, bring yourself to the painting, bring yourself to the sculpture. Look at it.
Well, I think part of it, excuse me, Stephanie, I think part of it is the way the museum set up these shows. They often have commentary that is very abstract. It's difficult to follow. If you don't know anything about art, it's, you wander around in a stupor. I don't think the museums do that much to educate viewers. I mean, they need to. Now they're thinking of all these ways to enthrall viewers with pyrotechnics. There's this new thing about a Van Gogh show where they make the paintings come alive. I don't know if you've heard about that.
I have. I'm gonna try to go see it, I think, this fall, just to know what's, just I try to keep up on stuff in the art world, but I'm not, so I'm like, I feel like you do. As an artist, and I want to get to your actual painting and your visual artwork as well, but before we do that, since you brought up the museum thing, as both a physical visual artist and a painter and a sculptor and a glass artist and a writer about these things, what do you think museums could do? Because I do think this is a conversation museums are having. Hey, how can we compete with social media and with the digital world, and how are we going to keep people engaged? What's your feeling on it?
Well, I do think it's an important thing to keep people engaged, because obviously if they don't go, it's all moot. But people do flock to museums. I mean, wherever you go, I mean, I think the Metropolitan Museum has like 6.5 million viewers. There aren't too many venues outside of theme parks that have that kind of patronage. I think that I think most people like to be educated. I don't know. I told you I had this concept to do a video on how a piece of art is made. And there have been I was going to do it in a certain kind of a way, but other people have made that. I think whenever you go to a museum and they have a little film set up about the artist, everyone goes into that room to see the little film about the artist. I think getting people involved with maybe workshops, I think people love that kind of a thing. I see most of the little workshops they have are geared towards children. Why couldn't they also be geared towards adults? As part of, relevant to the exhibit. One of the things I did, I've taught art in a lot of contexts, and one of the contexts is on a cruise ship. I have lectured on a cruise ship, and I always come up with a program they want me to that's relevant to the cruise. But I think it enhances, that kind of activity does enhance something participatory that's relevant to the exhibit itself, plus education is, I think, where the museums need to be going. I don't know about all of this technical stuff. I think we have enough of that with our smartphones and our enough already. Enough already.
Right. For me, there's nothing like getting in the room with the actual object.
Yes.
There's something, and I don't know what it is, and I don't know if you have an impression of what it is. There's something magical in some way. There's something different. There's something tangible. There's something emotional about being in a room with, the original Raphaels, being in the Raphael rooms in the Vatican and being in that space
Yes. I also think tour guides in person make a huge difference. You know, a lot of the museums give you these headphone things and people are walking around also listening, which makes them have to go sequentially through the exhibit and time it a certain way. If there's an actual person leading the group, like they do in most of the European museums, people ask questions, they engage. I don't know. I'm still for people.
Yeah, I'm still for people too, even though we're in the middle of the pandemic and we're all stuck in our weird virtual world.
Well, we need more than ever, right?
Well, and it's so interesting because you're a portraitist, right? I mean, that's a lot of what you do is you paint beautiful portraits of people. So you really are a people connector.
Well, I am not. I don't call myself a portraitist because I'm really not going terribly much for resemblance or character, which is mostly what portraiture is about. I'm consider myself a figurative artist, but I have not always been a figurative artist. I started. I mean, I've studied many years and I've worked in many genres, but I started with abstraction. And some people start with abstraction and go into more descriptive figurative work, and some people go the other way. I started with abstraction. I got into figurative work because, I don't know, maybe it has something to do related to the writing. I have messages I want to give. I have things I want to say. So it seemed that I needed to put them in some kind of recognizable form to say them more effectively. So I got into figurative work, which doesn't mean only human beings. I mean, I think pots can speak also. Pots have personality and flowers have personality and everything does. But anyhow, right now I always look for the abstract in the figurative. And lately I'm going back a little bit more into the abstract. So the figurative is a little bit more a part of it. So I'm not really a portrait painter,
but you do paint a lot of humans. You do paint a lot of people.
It's a lot of humans.
And that takes having to pay attention to people and try to capture something about them and their relationship to the world or their relationship to who they are, their body, how they wear themselves. It's all of those things.
And everything that's inside, which is reflected, you know, to try to give, I always say, this is something I've said in both of my books, that in my opinion, and I have always thought of an artist, especially a visual artist, as an alchemist. You know, an alchemist is someone who takes raw metals and turns them into gold. And I think that's what artists do. We take gooey paint or sheets of glass or nothing, and we turn it into something that feels alive. It's like magic.
What it being a visual artist, you were a visual artist first, and then you became a writer, right? You started.
But you know, visual artists usually have to have a day job.
Yes. Yes.
I've had many day jobs, and many of them involve writing. So I won't say that they didn't involve creative writing. Well, I guess writing is a creative act. So sure, but I mean, it was more purposeful or commercially based. So yes, I was a writer simultaneously with going to art school. So.
Right, but I feel like you were coming at your artistic life as an artist, as a visual artist. That seems to be your personal drive. And then you also start expressing yourself through words. What did, or since you were doing them simultaneously, what did both of them, what did the visual arts teach you about writing, or what did writing teach you about the visual arts? Like, how have they played off of each other in your life?
Good, great question. Well, I love both of them for different reasons. You know, I love the clarity and simplicity of writing. It seems so direct, and it's so compact. I love that. You know, I like so many visual artists. I have a warehouse of art. What do I do with it? You know, it's like I'm dragging it around on my back. What do I do with it? I would like to give a lot of it away, but that's very difficult. I'll tell you about that if you want to hear. But I love the clarity of writing. And I love the fact that you can see what you're doing. This is the thing about painting, and that I think people do not realize. You start painting and you do something. And as you progress, you keep covering up. Every new step covers up the previous step. So it all is disappearing before your eyes. And eventually you wind up, I mean, it's a series of steps, it's sequential. You wind up with this piece, this finished piece. But it's one story. There were 1,000 stories that are gone. And sometimes one of the 1,000 stories was better than the final story, you know? But with writing, you can keep all, I love that. You can keep all your drafts going. I can keep one version. I can change this. I can manipulate. I can go back and forth. And it's all there. It all still exists. It's a very frustrating thing about visual art, but that's the nature of it. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to do that exercise of that I had to take out of my book called A Painting Speaks. What I was going to do was to make a time-elapse photographs of a painting being made. I actually did that for the creative path. This was the painting on the creative path was the painting I made. It took me 10 days. I was in the studio with a little plastic bag and a clothespin attached to my painting apron. And I was painting, and every 10 minutes or so, I'd step back, click, then I'd go back to painting. And while I was painting, I was talking. And at the end of the day, I would transcribe my notes. So what I wound up with was, I mean, someday if I ever can do this, I would like to do it in video. You could actually see it, the whole thing being made. But I actually, this painting told its story of how it got made. And it was I thought it was pretty fascinating. You know, it didn't make it to publication, but it's pretty fascinating. And I always wanted to do that with a work of art. I think that would be something you can have in a museum. You know how people go to, if you go to Venice and you go to that little island, or the little island where they have the glass blowing.
Murano.
Yeah, Murano, I couldn't think of it. People line up to see the little glass animals we made. It's mesmerizing. And we don't get to see that for art. So
that's what I started to say. So many people, you know, because I write art historical fiction, and that's part of what I try to do is bring the process to life.
The process.
So that they don't think that the painting just plops out,
right,
you know, as it is. And
whoops, looks like it plopped out.
Or look, oh, there it is.
Exactly. And then they think, because they just see the finished thing, they think, wow, the artist, how did you think of that? People say that to me all the time. How did you think of that? I said, I didn't think of it. I created it step by step by step by step. I didn't think of it. I'm not a magician. I'm just somebody who worked at this thing. But you don't realize that when you're looking at art. That's why people think artists are some kind of magicians. We're not.
Right. And I think that's why they get put up on these pedestals of like, oh, that's untouchable. I could never do something like that. But it's not. I
can draw a straight line. I cannot tell you how many people in my life have said that sentence to me. Yes.
Yeah, it's the same thing with writing too, right? I mean, you sit down, you know, you were saying you get to keep parts, but there's all kinds of parts of my books that go away and they never, you know, they're like
right.
Hemingway's iceberg underneath the water, right? It also exists, but it gets painted over in a way while you create it and you build it and you try to grow it and all of those things. I think that's a beautiful part about art. I love that idea that you would put together that time lapse of a painting. I think that would be so instructive for so many people and so helpful for so many people to appreciate what they're looking at.
Exactly. Then it will make sense. And it also conveys the idea, wow, maybe I can do that too.
So take me back to what attracted you to being a painter and a visual artist when you were young? Like what pulled you into that, made you go, this is me, this is what I want to do?
Well, I think all creative people, have a calling early in life. And I did have a calling to do something creative, but I love to dance. When I was a young person, I love to dance. I like to write. I like to draw. You know, I like to do a lot of things. What am I going to wind up doing? But I knew I had to do something because I wasn't going to be in business. I had to do something creative. And also back then it was, I have to say, it was possible to do that. You didn't need quite as much money to survive as you do now. And it was possible. You know, I went to art school after college for 7 years. I went for 7 years after I graduated college, 5 days a week to a studio in Carnegie Hall to learn to paint. And that's not something anybody could afford to do today, but I was able to do that. Anyhow, that's how I was studying dance and I was drawing, and I met someone who introduced me to Norman Rabin, who became my teacher. He was the son of Sholem Aleichem, the youngest son. He was a Russian guy. When I first studied with him, he was already he may have been almost 70 at that point. And he had a studio in Carnegie Hall. Carnegie Hall building had an auxiliary building behind it that was famous. It was one of the most wonderful places ever. It was just filled with artist studios. You'd ride up in the elevator and you'd hear opera singers, and you'd get off and there were people, ballerinas practicing in the hallways. And it was just this incredible font of creativity. It was amazing. So I went to Studio 1101, that was Norman Rabin's studio, for 7 years, for 5 days a week. And I just got a call a couple of weeks ago from Harper's Magazine that was writing an article about Bob Dylan, because Bob Dylan found his way there to Norman Rabin's studio for 2 months. He was a student there for 2 months.
Were you there at the same time?
He had the easel next to mine. That story has followed me. Even now, someone called me to write about, they're writing about his experience in Norman's class. He was only there 2 months. There were people who were there for 10 years. But anyhow, all of a sudden, there were a lot of young people there at the time. Or everyone's friends started picking them up from art class when Bob Dylan was there. So it was interesting.
I love the idea of being in this space where you were saying opera singers and ballerinas and painters, and then Bob Dylan's there, because I always think that the arts, all of the arts, feed off of each other in a culture like that.
Absolutely.
It's not just about the visual artists learning from the visual artists. You're learning from musicians, and you're learning from writers, and you're learning from all of us are doing that all the time.
You'd be painting and listening to someone playing the cello next door. It was just an amazing place.
It has to impact the way you create art. Did you take that with you after that? Did you take that idea of pulling from all?
Actually, I did, because when I left there, I needed to find studio space. And I had a friend who was a writer, and he happened to have an article written in a local East Village Other newspaper. And when he left me his article, I was looking through the classifieds, and I saw an article, a classified studio for rent, women only, $15 a month. I said, no, this cannot be correct. It must be $150. Okay. It was 15. I went there the next day. It was a big loft in Greenwich Village, rented by radical feminists. And there were like 20 women working there. And I worked there after I left Norman's class. I worked there for 15 years.
15 years.
15 years. I worked there painting, learning my craft, being a painter.
With all other women. That's extraordinary.
All other women. When I went there, men were not allowed, not even to visit. But little by little, the women who had been there before me left, and I kind of inherited the place. So I changed the policy. I allowed men to visit, but I never rented a space to a man. I felt like I couldn't. I would keep it a room of our own.
Wow.
And it was an amazing place. We had all kinds of artists there. We had writers. We had weavers. We had an incredible place.
That is incredible. Now you're giving me like inspiration for what I want to do with my life one day. I'm like, I want to do that. I want to like make that space and make it happen for women to all come different kinds to get together to create art together. That's amazing. Oh my gosh, you're the greatest human. Okay.
Hardly. I was just very fortunate. But if you're going to do it, please call me. I'll help you.
I will. You'll be first on the list. You'll be the first person I call if I get around to doing it. That is so great. Okay, so you wrote the book where you brought in the readers into your studio to see the process. Now this book is how to help viewers go to a museum and go interact with art and go have their own thing.
Read art, how to understand art. Mm-hmm.
And it's about sort of the spirituality of the creation of art, right?
The book that I'm working on is called The Xenovort. Believe it or not, that title, it has not been taken. My agent is amazed that title has not been taken. The third book, we haven't sold it yet. I've just written about 50 or 60 pages. It's about the spirituality of art. It's a little more, it's more poetry about, it's more poetry than prose, I think. It's the Zen of art, but the Zen is with a small z. So it's about a certain kind of attitude of improvisation, something that I'm exploring as a different way to think about creating. And the last chapter, it has 10 chapters. The last chapter is going to be called Spilled Ink. And I'm doing the Spilled Ink projects now. It's kind of a form of improvisational art making. I don't know where it's going to go. It's just a new thing for the book. I'm very excited. I'm very excited about the book, and it'll be illustrated. And
that's the beauty of creating art and writing books. You don't know where that process is ever going to take you, right? I always feel like that's part of the spiritual process of being a writer or a creator or an artist is you don't know where you don't know how you're going to change. You don't know how you're going to sort of morph and be different after the process.
But you know that one thing, everything you do stimulates you to go further. You never want to stop. I mean, I'm sure you feel that way. I don't know an artist who doesn't feel that way. And the other thing, and this is one of the things that's going to come out in the Zen of art, is how the wonderful, miraculous way that the ideas come to you. You think you go to them, but they come to you. You just, and they just come to you. And but they come to you because of the work you do and what you put out. You know.
Yes. Yeah. There's somebody who said
it back to you.
If you want the train of inspiration to hit you, you have to go stand on the tracks. You can't be wandering.
Plug in, tune in.
You got to be there.
I wrote a little haiku. It's not really a haiku, but I wrote a little haiku for just as a guide for the Zen of art, and it goes. Art, it's 17 syllables. Art is my secret passageway, the portal to the cave of my soul. And that is what I think art does for us. It takes us into our identity. I mean, it creates it and it acquaints us with, and that's what we're expressing. I mean, we're very, very fortunate to be able to do it.
Oh, you're the best. I'm so glad I found your book, The Joy of Art, because it means that I found you and got to have this conversation, which is going to be inspiring me for the next 2 months. This is great. I love this.
Story time with Stephanie Storey. Story time virtually. We've got time and plenty of stories, talking stories in a novel way. Story time with Stephanie Storey.